Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. So welcome to our ward boundary review public information session. In this session, we're going to be chatting about the options that have been proposed by our consultants, Watson and Associates. This report was presented to council and committee last week and is now available for public feedback. For those of us who are joining online, throughout the presentation, you can feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will address them in the Q&A session, which will happen just shortly after the presentation. So my name is Jeannie Raycroft, and I am part of the project team here at the City of London. We are joined at the City by Sarah Corman and Pam. We are here today to present to you with Watson and Associates. I'm joined by Zachary Spicer and Josh Valenti as well. So they're going to get started giving you an overview of what the ward boundary options are going to look like going forward. If you do have any questions, we will address them after the presentation. Those who are joining us in the room, you will also get a chance to ask your questions after the presentation. So hopefully everybody enjoys and we will get started.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jeannie. Appreciate it. Wonderful to be here. Thank you all for joining us. Normally, when we have an open house, we would have poster boards around the room. People could browse around, look at different slides, things like that. Have a conversation amongst themselves, ask us questions. A little bit different in a virtual format, but what I will do is go through some of our slides here to give you a sense of where we are with the project and what options and alternatives may be available. And then we will open it up for questions and answers, but also comments, concerns, anything that is on your mind as we move forward. This is the second round of public consultation. Really what we are looking for at this stage is feedback about what some of these options look like to you. We're not asking you to either vote or endorse on or to vote for or endorse any particular option over another. We would like to get your thoughts about how well you think they reflect the community and what they may what strengths and weaknesses each may have. Could we go to the next slide? So just a bit of context here to start us off. The legislation across Ontario basically says that the minimum size for a council is 5, one of which has to be the head of council. So 4 councillors and a mayor, who's referred to in the municipal act as the head of council. London London has 15 members, so 10 above the minimum. But with that said, the composition across Ontario varies significantly. There are smaller communities with more councillors. There are larger communities with fewer. There are no sort of set standards in place, but as we can see across a couple of different local comparators, we compare the sort of neighborhood here, looking at large cities like Brantford, Cambridge, Guelph, Kitchener. London is slightly above the average of some of these other places, with 15 members of council for an average population of 28,154 residents per council member. The next slide. There are a number of principles in place when we are designing wards, and I think that we'll see a couple of these principles highlighted in each of the different options. These principles are sometimes in tension with each other, meaning that in a perfect world, all of them would be fully in balance. That's not always the case, and I'll explain why that is in a second. But all of these principles add up to what we call effective representation. So let's start with the first. The first is balancing current population distribution among the wards. Essentially, what we are trying to do here is to make sure that each member of council represents a roughly equal number of people. This ensures that there's an equal workload, but there's an equal amount of representation for each citizen at City Hall. We also want to make sure that the wards are balanced in the future. So we are looking for we are looking towards the 2030, 2034, 2026 election cycle, meaning that the wards wouldn't necessarily just balance today, but they would balance in the future as well. And so you don't have to do this after every single election. We also want to make sure that the ward boundaries are drawn impartially and in consideration of natural and man-made features. Now, this could be major roadways, rail lines, waterways. We want to ensure that the boundary lines are smooth and recognizable, meaning that they don't jot out into odd configurations, making it confusing for people to understand which ward they may be in. And then finally, communities of interest. This essentially means that communities of interest are established communities of interest are contained within single wards. Meaning that you wouldn't have a ward boundary line bisecting a established neighborhood or a set historical, economic, or cultural community within the city. A lot of the engagement that we focused on in the first round was trying to better understand where some of these communities of interest are. You can tell that there is a bit of tension within some of these principles. So, for instance, keeping communities of interest intact, meaning that they are contained within a single ward, means that the population between two different wards may not balance. One may be higher, one may be lower. What we are trying to understand is, where do Londoners put value on these principles? And we did that a lot in the first round. The options that we will show you represent some of that, and I will show you how some of that tension has played out in some of the alternative ward designs. Next slide. What we want to do first is evaluate the existing ward system. And I would start off by saying that when you look at the wards and you look at the population, we're not looking at something that is broken. The ward system in London in its current state has a lot of strength in it. For the most part, the population is relatively balanced. There's about 4 wards that are either under or above the average of 32,965 residents. Now, with that said, the disparity between some of them is considerable. So, for instance, the population disparity between the largest and smallest wards is over 18,000 people. That's a lot of extra constituents to represent for one particular city councillor. That also doesn't lead us towards effective representation. With that said, the wards are relatively balanced. They do a pretty good job of comfortably containing communities of interest, and the boundary lines follow naturally recognizable borders, leading us to argue that the current system is partially successful in providing effective representation for the residents of London. The challenge, of course, is that as the city grows, a lot of the population balance between between certain wards worsen. So as we move towards the 2030 and 2034 election cycle, we see that a lot of the wards are either significantly above or below the average. So meaning that there are some problems on the horizon. One of our tasks in this process was to ensure that we're providing for better population distribution as we move forward towards the 2026, 2030, and 2034 election cycles. So what does some of those alternatives look like? Let's move to option 1. And option 1 would probably be something that is familiar to most people who are looking at the current system. A lot of the wards look and feel very, very similar, with a lot of the change coming in the northern part of the city. So most of those northern wards have seen some degree of change along their boundaries. This is mostly done to account for the significant population growth happening within that particular corner of the city. Under this scenario, we can see that currently one of the wards would be outside the 15% variance range. But with that said, this particular option is largely successful for providing for effective representation. The boundary lines are natural. the communities of interest are largely contained within single wards. And the population growth is relatively balanced as we move towards 2030 and 2035. Next option. What would the ward map look like if we did our best to try to balance population as we move forward into the future towards 2030 and 2034? What we have here is an attempt to do that. And so as you can see, this option leans towards population parity and population parity in the future. With that said, this is a map that is probably not recognizable to many folks who are joining us today. They may look a little bit unfamiliar. And one of the things that you will notice is that the boundary lines, for the most part, don't follow natural boundaries, and is not entirely successful in containing communities of interest within single identifiable wards. Next option. Option 3 builds from the first option, and so you can see a lot of the similar traits happening here. A lot of change happening in the northern part of the city, into some of the northern wards. As we move towards 2030 and 2034, this is an option that better provides for population parity. It largely supports communities of interest and largely follows natural boundaries. It accounts for population growth in the future and balances population present. I'll say that it does provide for effective representation. You see the final option. The final option tries to also account for population parity as we move forward towards 2030 and 2035, building from option 2. In this regard, it is slightly more successful in doing so. The challenge, of course, is that it does not protect most of the communities of interest across the city, most of which are coming in the downtown core. Population is balanced now, and in the future, it uses mostly natural boundaries and is only partially successful in providing for effective representation. Next slide. So looking at all the options together, you can see that there is some of that tension that I mentioned previously in the different principles of play. Some options are better at providing for population parity. Others are better at protecting communities of interest. Some are better at providing for population parity in the future. Right? Each of these is doing something a little bit different. But with that said, what our purpose here today is to get your feedback both on these options. You may look at some of these options and say, this is not something that I like, or there's something here that I do like. We would like to hear from you in that regard. What do these options do well? What do they not do well? What emerges from this session, and as we move towards the next phase of the project, will be final recommendations. It may be one of these options, it may be a hybrid of them, or it may be something completely different. What counts now is your feedback. So I think we can open it up for feedback. Of course, we have the Get Involved London website. There is a survey there that you can take in various options, of which you can provide us with feedback on the options, or any comments, questions, concerns that you have about the process thus far. We also have some time here tonight, and I see that there are a couple of questions coming in the Q&A, so I'm going to get to some of those. Jacqueline Fraser asks, how old is our council composition bylaw? Can it be changed because we have growth in such size? And Jacqueline would also ask if we can put back preliminary option 3. It seems to be the one that has the most favorable responses so far. Sure, so I'll do my best to answer your question, Jacqueline. Here's option 3 on the slide for you. In terms of how old the council composition bylaw is, I'm not sure which bylaw you're necessarily referring to. Perhaps a member of the clerk's staff might be able to help me out in that regard. I don't want to say wrong date or anything.
Hi, Jacqueline. Thank you for your question. So the current composition of council has been in place since the 2010 municipal election. So that's a 14 ward member council with the mayor making the council composition 15. Council composition can be changed in a very similar process. So the number of councillors can be changed by direction of city council via a bylaw in a similar process that we're undertaking right now. However, it was not part of the scope of this project. So part of this project was only to redo the 14 wards at this time. The timeline for a council composition change is about the same. So it would have to take place prior to January 1st of a municipal election year in order for the number of councillors to be changed to take effect for the next election. So again, that is not part of the scope of this current project, but the process is very similar. It's changed via bylaw. A similar process would be undertaken where there would be public consultation and feedback. But it is not part of the scope of this project. It would ultimately be a decision of council if they wanted to change the number of councillors.
Thanks so much, Jeannie. Appreciate that. I couldn't quite remember the date of the last change. So yes, and thank you for filling us in on the process. I should mention too, of course, that the status quo remains an option available to council. That this is a review, not necessarily a mandatory change by any means. I do see a comment here. Quite appreciate option 1 and 2 look quite reasonable. This is from someone who's says they're anonymous. Option 1 and 2 look quite reasonable, which is I should say is totally allowed. You can be anonymous if you would like. However, option 4 misses the mark on communities of interest and actually breaks up some neighborhoods. And the focus here is on Ward 5 in this particular option. So yes, Ward 5. Yep, absolutely. So definitely appreciate that feedback. That's precisely what we are looking for tonight. So thank you for that. Jonathan asking, what is the plan moving forward? Will residents have to vote on this in a referendum at the next election? Will it then be implemented post-election? No. So any changes can be implemented via bylaw by council. That there doesn't necessarily need to be a referendum. The changes that will be considered would be in place for, if there were changes, they would be in place for the next municipal election. So 2026 is the election where the new boundaries would be in place. Thank you very much for that question, Jacqueline.
Hello, we have a question in the room here.
Yes.
Hello, I have 2 questions. One is you mentioned that the population numbers include the student population, and I'm just wondering how that's represented. Is it like 1-for-1 that they are considered as equal to other residents in the city, or maybe not so equal, knowing that students would not necessarily engage so much in municipal politics and are sometimes transient? So I'm just wondering if what is that representation? Is it 1-for-1?
Yeah, so I would mention here the numbers aren't necessarily electors; these are residents. So while you have someone who may not vote in the next election, they're still represented by the councillor.
That actually leads to my second question, which is, how does the ward boundaries reflect voter turnout in the last election? We'll say that does it maybe exacerbate some of the issues that we have with voter turnout, or maybe even them out a little bit, because there's some wards that get better turnout than others?
Yeah, I don't have the turnout figures for each of the wards. I'm not sure if anyone from the clerk's office has that information. But the wards necessarily don't have a direct correlation with turnout per se. I think there's a number of factors which would influence turnout. The leading factor identified by existing academic research is simply electoral competition. So where you see a lot of councillors in place, or a lot of competition amongst them, so a really strong slate of candidates, or a really strong slate of candidates for mayor, who spend a lot of time and energy campaigning and discussing issues, that's where you see, or this is where you tend to see greater turnout. So the composition of the wards don't necessarily have a direct effect on voter turnout per se. With that said, where you may see disparities between turnout, part of that could be for a number of factors, including density of candidates, competition, media attention, things like that. So there could be a number of variables at play, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Dan, I have a question here from Dan. So do the options include current infill? So I think Dan may be asking about how some of the population numbers were calculated. Maybe Josh, I'm sorry to sort of put you on the spot here. Josh is a colleague from Watson's who is a planner. So I'm not a planner myself, but Josh may be able to sort of fill us in a little bit on how some of the population projections are done, some of the data sources that go into that, and I think that may help you with that question, Dan. Josh, would you mind if I threw it over to you for a second? Josh, we can't hear you. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we got you.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, thanks, Zach. So short answer is yes, it does include infill opportunities. The population and projections provided within the projects here are derived from municipal figures. Municipality does have growth targets looking out to 2041 and beyond. And we have taken that information and used their allocations across the municipality that identifies one, greenfield development, new areas, subdivisions, development applications in active development applications, but also infill opportunities, nodes and corridors downtown, infill opportunities through density changes have all been incorporated into these allocations over the 10-year horizon.
Thanks so much. Appreciate that, Josh. I hope that that helps to answer your question, Dan. But if you had any other questions about population figures, infill, anything along those lines, or if I've misinterpreted your question, please feel free to write in and let us know.
Hi there. I'm in the
Hello.
committee. Hi, I'm in the committee
Hi.
room. Sorry, I've kind of got a few questions here.
No problem at all.
Okay, so I did watch the presentation to the Strategic Priorities Committee, which was also a public participation meeting. And there was quite a bit of discussion amongst the councillors regarding which numbers were used, because I believe the numbers that you initially had built these options on are from 2022 and perhaps do not include recent planning decisions. Could you provide an update on what your organization is doing to accommodate for that?
Certainly. So actually, maybe it would be better if I throw it over to Josh to answer that one.
Yep, thanks. And I'll say the numbers we have in this presentation are the same numbers that was presented initially. They are based around a 2022 study. Yes, things have changed within the municipality from proposed and approved development activity. However, it's a bit of a crystal ball, the planning atmosphere right now and landscape. The numbers from 2022, although maybe a year or two outdated, still do take into effect and account for active developments in the pipeline where known growth and development is happening. Yes, there may be opportunities that have arisen since then, and we are looking to connect back with the municipality to ensure that those numbers are captured within these numbers. One thing to note, though, is we are looking out 10 years. So development is a bit of a process from time of applications, council approval to actually being built and developed. Not to say that those recent applications won't be developed within the 10-year horizon, but a number of the applications, the active applications that we know of already, as of 2022, have been built into this forecast and is a strong view on what we expect to see. Although there may be slight changes across data, we are looking to validate that further and understand where these changes may be happening with respect to the numbers that have been presented to date.
Okay, so I'm not sure if you can speak to specifics or not, but one example that kind of comes to mind would be the development of what was formerly the psychiatric hospital, Highbury and Oxford, that whole area there, which is going to be basically like rebuilt into a community. So, for example, would you be able to comment on whether that development is considered in these numbers?
High level, I do believe it was considered to some level in these numbers. The timing of that development really plays into it, and I have to go back and check to see and validate how much of that development is included within this 10-year horizon versus maybe what is anticipated today. That might change slightly, but again, that is a redevelopment and in a longer term growth area, and it may not all be captured within this 10-year horizon at this time.
Okay, I think that would, for myself, that would be an area of concern, that some of these recent planning decisions, which involve some very substantial, developments, like especially Highbury and Oxford. There's been several high-rise complexes. There's a development on the former Victoria Hospital grounds in South London, in the Soho district. So there is quite a bit of really significant activity, and my concern would be that has been incorporated into the final discussion. Sorry, I'm just working from a different, I expected the presentation to be a little bit longer, and I'm just trying to pull some of my numbers together and questions. I guess just a comment from myself is, I know that the direction of council was to balance out the numbers of people as well. But I think, and certainly this wasn't the direction, but just a comment that I think sometimes there needs to be other social economic factors considered as well, where, perhaps high acuity need areas need to be considered in serving a population, such as where there's a population where English is a second language, is a consideration. Communities are living in poverty or unemployment, high unemployment. We're dealing with homelessness issues, food security, crime disturbances, et cetera. So I think sometimes the challenge can be, we can balance out the numbers, but there can be other social economic factors that can make it challenging to represent the ward.
Definitely appreciate that point. I think that we would probably consider those to be a community of interest, right? If there is a common socioeconomic background amongst a sort of geographic population, that would be a community of interest. And that is part of what we are trying to do in terms of balancing population growth, population parity out with the current communities of interest, right? So it's not necessarily always about neighborhoods per se. It can also be around population density, rural, urban. There's a number of different ways in which we can define communities of interest. So I appreciate that point, and that is certainly something that we are considering as well. I appreciate that.
Okay. And so along that point, were you provided by the city with some kind of information, like outlining what the current communities are? Like, you are coming at it from a consulting role. What kind of information were you provided to identify communities of interest?
So we have all the neighborhood information along with socioeconomic data. So we are looking at that. We've also had the first round of consultation where we were asking the public to help us identify what these different communities of interest are. We've had an opportunity to meet with all of the members of council to better understand the neighborhoods and different communities of interest within their own individual wards as well. So with that said, if there is a community of interest that you believe is identifiable, that you think may not be reflected in any of these options, this is an opportunity for us to also learn about it.
Okay. And so when you're saying that, like, the public kind of consultation process, you're really referring to that meeting at strategic planning where there was like one public speaker regarding providing feedback?
No, we had several open houses earlier in the year. I believe June was the time frame. We also have engagement data coming in through the public participation website and survey data. So there's been various opportunities for the public to provide us input from those initial stages.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Just another question. I noticed that in some of the options, the ward numbering system kind of starts over from scratch again. So for example, in some of the options, for example, let me just pick an example here. Like such as in option number 2, Ward 3 basically becomes Ward 5 or kind of like a combination. Is there consideration to trying to keep the ward numbers similar to what was existing in the past to maintain some familiarity with things? Or how do you kind of decide when you're defining guidelines what the number will be?
So the number, or in some cases, the name, is something that would happen after the bylaw is approved. So, for instance, there was some concern at the committee meeting where some folks said, well, maybe we should have neighborhoods attach these numbers. We wouldn't necessarily be recommending numbers and names. That can be done afterwards. They can be renumbered. What we are really looking at is the composition of the ward boundaries themselves. But certainly, I would definitely agree with you that having similarly numbered or named wards would be good for familiarity. There are certain options here which take a slight modification from the current ward system. In that case, there are wards that look very similar to previous wards. It would make sense to number them the same way, right? In other options, there's significant change to them. So I don't think, from my perspective, there's a natural numbering system to them. But I would agree that if there is a way to make it familiar, it should be used.
Okay.
And maybe
And
just sorry, can I just jump in as well here? As Jack has as Zach has mentioned, these are preliminary, and that decision on the numbers or the names is a decision made by council. But part of our mandate is getting an idea of what they may be, or what they should be, whether that is numbers or naming a naming convention different comparable to what we see today in the numbering system. So maybe a question back to you, your thoughts and feelings related to the numbering system, or should the municipality look to go towards more of a naming convention there, perhaps including the neighborhoods that are captured by these boundaries?
Yeah, I think that depends largely on kind of where some of these boundaries land. I think there was a good discussion about that at the committee meeting about some of the pros and cons of names for the various wards. I know that you have done like different surveys and projects like this. Are you happy with the amount of public participation that has happened so far in terms of the feedback, or are you really needing, like, how do you feel it's been so far?
Great question. And I would say we tend to see greater participation in the second round. So we have 3 open houses tomorrow that they're all in person. I would expect those to be slightly higher than what we saw in the first round. With that said, I would say the first round was fairly consistent to what we see elsewhere, to be honest. The first round, where there isn't necessarily options to view, there's a bit less to kind of chew on. Sometimes the first round tends to be a little bit lower than the second, but I would say for the most part in London, it has been consistent with what I have personally seen elsewhere in other communities.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, just my last question, which is probably more for the city staff. In terms of when this new ward boundaries are implemented, are there plans regarding communication in terms of communicating these ward boundaries? And is that budget flexible based on how many changes and how much work it might take to communicate these?
Hi, yes. So it's Sarah, Deputy City Clerk. Yes, there is a communication plan. Previously, when we've made adjustments to ward boundaries, we sent out a postcard saying what ward you're in and what type of information or where you'll be voting in the next municipal election. So similar to a voter notification card, it's a neighborhood mail out, a postcard that indicates what your new ward is.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That was all very informative, and I look forward to providing some additional feedback once I've looked through things further. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We have a question, or a question here from Dan. Any current indication which option is being favored? With this actually one of the first opportunities that we've had to hear from the public. So right now I don't have any indication of which is favored. With that said, if you have thoughts, we would definitely welcome them. If there's something that is standing out to you as being particularly good or particularly bad, we would definitely appreciate hearing it. We're not necessarily asking you to sort of vote on any particular option, but if there are elements of one that you like and elements of another that you like, if there are elements that you feel don't serve the community well, we would definitely appreciate some of that feedback. But at this stage, we're so early on in the second round of consultations. I don't have any sort of indication of which option or the components of any of the options are currently being favored at this point. But definitely appreciate the question, Dan.
Hi, Alex in the committee room.
Hi.
I have just as somebody who lives and works downtown, I'm not a fan of option 2. It just looks like it kind of dilutes the voice of downtown. And like the Ward 6 there, it looks like it breaks Ward 13. Sorry, Ward 13 is the current ward, and it looks like it breaks it into like 4 different wards. Yeah, not a fan of that. And just a question about option 3 in the comment section for effective representation. It looks like maybe that's not the right comment. It says, while this option favors representation by population, it fails to achieve other principles. So is there other principles it's not achieving? Because it's the same comment as option 4, which is partly successful.
Yeah. Yes, sorry for that. I think that may be a bit of a typo on our end. We apologize for that. The full report is on the Get Involved London site if you want to sort of dig into our rationale for any of these. But no, this one does provide for effective representation. I definitely appreciate you pointing that out. Fantastic question. I apologize for the error. I have a question for you, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I wanted to just to chat about downtown. I wanted to maybe get your thoughts on whether downtown should be encompassed in a single ward, if that would be better from your perspective, from a representation standpoint, or as few wards as possible. What are your thoughts about that, and what kind of representation that area of the city needs and requires in the future?
Yeah, I can see kind of both sides to this, where it might be effective to have more than one voice speaking for downtown. Because it's like, it's I don't know, it's like a pretty core part of our city, pun intended, and just like, and even as somebody who works in the social service sector, like, there's a lot of people with a lot of needs downtown, and just like I can see how, just multiple representatives might be more effective in like amplifying the voice of downtown, but also I can see how if it's just one part of a larger ward, the voice could be kind of ignored, if especially in the option where there's like 4 different wards kind of representing parts of downtown.
Okay. Is there one of the options that sticks out to you as being more effective for downtown residents, or is this something that we should reconsider?
Well, I guess really it seems like for the most part only option 2 kind of breaks up downtown.
Okay.
Yeah, the rest seem to kind of be pretty close to the existing Ward 13 boundary.
Okay. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. I would say too, in the first round of consultation, we had a similar discussion with folks who were living in the rural part of the city as well, and they had a question as well about would it be better for them to have a single representative or have three representatives who partially represent the rural area. And this is something that I would say that we come back to quite frequently in other cities, where the question is, is it better to have multiple representatives for one geographic area or one single one? And really, it's sort of the question is, if you had one single one, would they devote their entire focus to issues affecting that particular area, or is it better to have three voices who have different interests throughout the ward? So I think it is a classic question about representation, and it's one that that takes us into different directions in each community. So I definitely appreciate your input here, and I thank you for it.
All right, it's Mariana, Committee Room 1 and 2 again. I actually have some comments in regards to this topic. I think that this is really a key issue that it sounds like it needs a lot more discussion and thought to it. And what really struck me is that we kind of live in this age of polarization where it's kind of us versus them. It's like, rural versus urban, commuters versus, people driving cars. And that if we do have more diversity within the wards, then it does require counselors to have, to think about all of the issues in their ward, as opposed to being able to, really just focus on one community of interest. So I think that sometimes if we, are too insular with these communities of interest, it doesn't serve the whole city. So I would really love to see an emphasis put on making sure that the wards have diversity within the ward, and so that it makes it a little bit more dynamic, in my view, that people are able to understand that the city contains many different communities, but yet we are all one. So we shouldn't be pitting one ward against another when people are at council discussing different ways to, say, spend budgets, or what projects are higher priority, that we're more prioritized around thinking holistically as opposed to thinking for each individual ward. So that was just my comment. Thanks.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much for that. And actually got me thinking. We had a kind of a really classic Canadian example of that after the amalgamation of Winnipeg in 1972. I'm sorry, I'm going back in history here, probably further than anyone would like, but there was an experiment tried where the city was essentially broken up into pie-shaped wards, where every councillor had a bit of the urban, a bit of the suburban, and a bit of the rural. So each ward was kind of a triangle coming out from the center. And the notion there was that everyone would represent a part of the city, and as a result, they would have to speak equally for them. One of the challenge there was that a lot of the councillors would simply campaign in the most densely populated area. And there was a feeling that they were focusing on a particular point of their pie slice as opposed to others. But I think that this is the challenge, right? How do we balance out some of the factors to provide for effective representation? And I would say I really appreciate the perspective that you've brought here tonight. A question here from Dan: how are emergency services affected by the ward changes? My understanding is that there wouldn't be necessarily any change. We don't necessarily deploy emergency services based upon wards, so there's usually a very different deployment schedule around sort of needs and resources, as opposed to saying one ward would get a fire station and one wouldn't, or something along those lines. So I feel free to anyone from the city to correct me if I am wrong in this, but I don't believe that there would be any change to how emergency services are deployed or used. Jeannie, I saw you appear, so maybe you want.
Hi, Dan. Zachary is correct. The changing the wards wouldn't affect any emergency services at this time. They are not directly related to the wards.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Jeannie, and thank you, Dan, for your question. I appreciate it. I don't see any questions online. Is there anyone in the committee room with either a comment or a question?
Yes.
Excellent.
All right. So my name is Gil Warren. I live in Ward 13 at Adelaide Central. I spoke at the council committee meeting last week. I have a number of questions and comments. I would also, as the discussion goes on this evening, like to come back with extra questions. But let's just go back to let's go back to the last discussion we had about the type of wards, where I would call them either single member wards or multi-member wards, if that people are like that. So a number of comments here that are related to that. So why am I interested in this, you say, some old guy who's here chatting. I noticed in your report that there was no political historic context to how we got the system we have now. You've commented tonight on, oh, it's a system that's not too bad and it's working, but it's got this growing population disparity problem. So I don't see why you guys didn't go back and look at the history and come up with like a one-page summary of how we got to this system. And the reason I ask that is because if you look at the current system, it was imposed on the City of London in about 2004 or 5 by the Ontario Municipal Board after a citizen's appeal of the previous system. Are you guys aware of that?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so the previous system was this multi-representative idea, the pie shape that you just talked about in Winnipeg. And I've been involved in city politics going back to the 1970s. And the reason we had a system of 7 wards with 2 councillors per ward, and each ward was pie-shaped like the one you referenced in Winnipeg. And we had been involved in city politics and campaigns, and we saw that system failed. The idea that you can get 5 or 6 councillors, representing downtown, it assumes that all councillors work equally hard. It assumes that all councillors have the same politics. And my position and the position of not just myself, but the other 3 people who participated in the OMB appeal, which was successful, and the City of London is still under the instructions of that ruling, that they shouldn't go back to a pie-shaped ward system or a multi-councillor with a multi-councillor system. And the reason was the same problem that you highlighted in Winnipeg, is that because of disparities in turnout, because there is a class system in this country, there are rich people who vote and poor people who do not. And in Winnipeg and in London, in the downtown core, there are poor people and they don't vote. And a clever politician who's an opportunist will know that the votes are out there in the suburbs among the wealthier people. And just as you said, they campaign out there. And if they're from that area, from that neighborhood, they can get themselves on council. The other problem we had before we forced the new system in place in London here was we would get councillors who would be on council for 10, 20, even 30 years. Very low turnover in terms of councillors. The council that we have now has a large number of younger, newer councillors that are more representative of the diversity of this community. And so my vote is very clearly to not go back, to not defy the Ontario Municipal Board, and stick with the basic design that we have now, which is looking at putting communities of interest together, 2 or 3 or 4 of them in some part of the city, and coming up with a ward. And I also strongly recommend in your recommendations, in option 2, let's look at option 2. That Ward 1 that you have down at the bottom, which I would define as a farm ward and an industrial ward, and that it includes some residential areas, and it must because the farm populations are so small. But the problem with that, I like that ward. You're trying to get the farm people there, but it splits up Lambeth in half, and that's the problem. And you're very firm about the idea that you have to have really easily recognized boundaries like Wellington Road or Southdale Road. But the reality is I've worked on campaigns, municipal campaigns. I've been a candidate myself. The reality is the person's at their door and they get a leaflet and it says you're in Ward 13. So they go, okay, right, I'll pay attention to that ward. And I think you guys are too focused on nice maps that follow straight lines. I agree it shouldn't be going down some back lane and alleyway and things like that. I would also say, if you look at the system we have now, it's using the river as a boundary in many cases. It's using the rail lines. And remember, in East London, it's not just a rail line of 1 or 2 tracks, there's 2 rail yards. And much of the city is squeezed between those 2 rail yards. You can't, the rail yards are like the Great Wall of China. It just really cuts off neighborhoods. So that's why we use them as a boundary, because there's not a lot of even roads across the rail yards. There are no roads across the rail yards. So I think that's an important consideration. And I have some other points as well, but I would like to see that you guys acknowledge the history here and the instructions of the Ontario Municipal Board. And I would point out that when we took that case to the board, there were 4 people who were the complainants. Myself, a guy who's now a city councillor, Sam Trossow, another person, Stephen Turner, who was a long-term councillor in London, and another person, Mr. Hurley, who subsequently moved out of London. But look at what happened there and look at the system that we had before. And the other thing is, I want to make a clear point here. There is a movement by some people, they might be staff or they might be a mayor or something, that, oh, there's too much democracy at City Hall and we have to cut down on the number of councillors. And, but when there's and the idea translates into when there's population growth, we have to work with the same number of wards and we can't add a ward or 2. But when you redistribute federal or provincial boundaries, and there's a greater increase in population, you increase the number of MPs in Parliament. And we just went through that process federally. The other thing I want to say about turnout for these meetings, and you guys are saying it's similar to other cities, and I think I would accept that answer. But the reality is, this is an inside baseball thing, right? Ward boundaries. The reality is that there are no political parties in the city, officially at City Hall level, but there are political parties in the federal and provincial ridings. The reality is that I see people sitting here tonight who are involved in the Green Party, the NDP, the Liberals, or the Conservatives at a high level. And if this is democracy we're talking about, this process has to be impartial. It can't favor any of those 4 parties. And if it does favor one of them, that weakens democracy. And we see how screwed up the US system is right now, where the guy who gets the most votes loses. So I think you should acknowledge, and you don't have to say this publicly, that the people you should be talking to are the party leaders federally and provincially in this city, because we just went through this process of redoing the federal boundaries. And the riding associations of all parties were very much involved in that. And the judge came up with an impartial ruling that everybody was happy with afterwards. So I know it's an elephant in the room and we're not supposed to talk about party politics, but when we're at something like ward boundaries, we should acknowledge that. I'm just going to stop for a second and get a glass of water. I'll be right back.
Sure. Thank you for that. Maybe I'll
Yeah, I've got more to say, but you can respond to those and then we'll finish off.
Sure, yeah, of course. Thank you for these comments. I definitely appreciate them. I wanted just to start off with the Winnipeg example, and just to say that my anecdote there was more just because it came to mind as we were talking, rather than endorsing any particular system or another. I think there's a good reason why we've seen that experiment really tried predominantly in Winnipeg, and then it was actually abandoned after, I think, 6 years. And hasn't really been duplicated widely since, precisely for some of the challenges that you mentioned above. So I mentioned that because I'm a public policy professor who specializes in municipal government, which means that I'm a bit of a municipal government nerd. So that's the reason why it kind of came up. But I want to give you the impression that that's something that is under active consideration. So I definitely appreciate that. I appreciate you mentioning the history here. It's something that we are aware of. We reviewed the history very quickly, briefly in the interim report and the discussion papers. But I don't think we dived too deeply into the OMB case itself. But I definitely appreciate that, and I appreciate your comments about the rail yards and the rail lines. Yeah, I know you have more comments, so why don't I hand it back to you?
Yeah, okay. So one of the things I raised at the city council meeting when I spoke last week, well, let's just talk about that meeting. So the public consultation was on the agenda at the beginning of the meeting. And I had read the agenda and knew that, and then you guys gave your report. And I thought that was kind of strange. I've been involved in city council consultations for a long time, and usually it was the consultant gives the report and then the public makes a talks about it or asks questions. And but anyway, and then it seemed almost like the chair of the meeting was in a hurry to make sure there wasn't any public comments. And I yelled down from the rafters, "Hey, what about us?" And I managed to get to speak. But after I spoke, a person came in and sat down beside me and said hello. It was Sandy Levin, a former city councilor here, who I know well. We chatted, and he was under the misconception that he could speak at the end of the meeting, but it was too late. And he sat through the meeting waiting patiently to give his 2 cents worth. He's from the Orchard Park Community Association, very involved there. And that person was interested in this issue, but he when he found out at the end of the meeting that there was no chance to speak, he was very angry and stomped out. So anyway, I think you need to work on your consultation process. Now, I want to talk about. Yeah.
So if I could just sort of clarify that, we weren't necessarily involved with the order of procedure for that particular meeting or the agenda. So I just want to clarify that we didn't ask to speak in any particular order on that. Right. So maybe that's something that you may want to clarify with staff. But I couldn't necessarily speak to that. But I appreciate the comment.
I understand the staff are here and they heard what I just said, so that's fine. Okay, so in terms of the options, okay, and I spoke about this last week. There's an option number one. Basically I sort of approve of that one, that option, but I suggested that, and I'm looking at the map now, that the section of what we call Old East Village, east of Adelaide, and north of the CN rail lines be put in with Ward 13 if you're going to be dealing with the stable or declining populations in the East End. And that ward, and this was raised by the Ward 1 councillor, that you took out a section of Hamilton Road, which is a very established community, and you put it in with 14, and he felt that it should be put back and use the river as a boundary. I agree with him with what he said. And then we discussed about how if you needed more people in Ward 1, you could include Pond Mills and Glencairn because they are a very established community. So just a comment there on option 1, I would like better if you altered those changes. But it still left a situation for Ward 4, which in option 1, the boundary becomes, I think, Oxford Street in the north, in the south of that ward. and you put part of Ward 3, you put part of Ward 4 into Ward 3, the section from it looks like Huron in Oxford. You can see a little block there. And I think that you just basically you sent Ward 4 to the suburbs. And I think you should bring Ward 4 back, and you could make the boundary Oxford Street for Ward 4, or you could make the rail lines, but you've really cut up Ward 4 there. And so, and then the problem with option 1 is your Ward 14 at the bottom, with the rural ward, we could call that. And then I would suggest that on the option 2 for that Ward 14, which then becomes Ward 1, that's pretty good attempt at getting the farmers into the city. It also includes most of the industrial areas where there aren't any voters, right? So it would make a councillor who had to deal with the farm issues as well as industrial land use. But you cut in that Ward 1 proposal in option 2, you got Lambeth cut up again. So it cut in half. So Lambeth would be the obvious community to put into that Ward 1 in option 2, because Lambeth used to be an independent town until London swallowed it up. Just for reference purposes, the reason that London has all those farms going all the way down to the Elgin County line is because there was a gigantic annexation in London in the 1990s, and the city swallowed up an entire township. And that's how we ended up with a bunch of farms, and people don't even realize that there are all these farms are in the city. And I think they're not getting the representation that they should. So I'm saying, I'm looking at more sympathetically at option 1, but with some quite serious changes in the downtown core, and the option 2 thing, proposal for a rural ward, which they call Ward 1 in that proposal. I think that'll do for me for now, because I've taken quite a bit of time, but can I reserve the option to come back later?
Of course, yeah. We're here till 7, so we definitely appreciate the comments that you have later, and we definitely appreciate the comments that you provided to us right now. This is exactly the sort of feedback that we are looking for. Again, what are the maps doing well? What are they not doing well? So thank you for that. I have a question here in the Q&A from Jacqueline. What one-on-one consultations have you had with the neighborhood associations? How will this impact their volunteer work? We haven't had any one-on-one consultations with the neighborhood associations. The neighborhood associations are free to come to any of the public engagement sessions, and of course, they're also free to fill out any of the engagement material on the website. We would definitely encourage them to do so and welcome the feedback. ULL, I may need a bit of help with the acronym. I believe is that the Urban League London? Do they support this review? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they do or not. I'm not super familiar with the group, to be entirely honest with you. But I see Jeannie has emerged. Yeah, Urban League London. Jeannie, I'm not sure if there's anything you want to jump here on. I saw your camera come on, so I wasn't sure if that was an indication you wanted to say something.
So the City of London has sent some dedicated and specific communications to the neighborhood associations. So they all received an email to the communications that they listed on the city's Neighbor Good website. So the contact information for the association was listed on the website, which is kept pretty up to date. They received a dedicated email, asking them for their feedback, both on the very first options as well as these preliminary options. We have also engaged with the appropriate city departments to make sure that we are mapping them and integrating that into any future options that are presented. If any of you are familiar with the Neighbor Good website, which is circulated
I think Jeannie is frozen, but we think we got the gist of what Jane was mentioning about the Neighbor Good website and the associated outreach with it. So thank you very much for that, Jeannie. I appreciate it. I don't see any written questions in the Q&A. We are, of course, more than happy to answer them if any are popping up, or there's anyone in the community room who has any further comments or questions, we would welcome that as well.
Sorry, it's Sarah here in the room.
Hi.
Just to talk about next steps as well. So the survey on the Get Involved is open until November 11th. You can also email elections@london.ca with any feedback. And then the report back to council with a final recommendation on an option is going in December to the meeting of SPPC. I believe that's December 10th. And then council will consider it the following week. So that is just timelines in terms of next steps to consider. As well, there's a lot of information regarding the background or information that we had in the first round of consultation that was prepared by Watson. That's also available on our Get Involved webpage, as well as the full report. It's 66 pages. So that is available both on the SPPC agenda from October 8th, as well as the Get Involved website.
Thank you so much. That's Sarah. Appreciate that. We'll be having some in-person consultation meetings tomorrow night as well throughout the city. We're very excited about that. 3 different locations in which you can join us: South London Community Center, the East Lions Community Center, and the Medway Community Center. If anyone is interested in joining us there, we would certainly welcome comments, questions, feedback. Those are also great opportunities to speak to your neighbors and other members of the community about the review and share your perspectives about the ward or anything else really. Not seeing anyone online. Again, though, if anyone in the committee room has further comments, we definitely welcome them. The gentleman earlier, I apologize, I forget your name, but if you have other comments that you want to provide to us, I don't see you on camera. There you are. We would be most welcoming for them. Thank you.
Oh, push the button. Hi. Okay. Yes, I think you were referring to me. Anyway, just a comment again about process from the meeting we had last week of the City Council Committee. I attempted to look up the video YouTube video of that meeting, and since it was a council committee meeting, it seems to have not been recorded. That you only have council meetings. Are you sure that it's not there? I looked this afternoon. It's not there. You did see it? It is there? Right. All right. Excellent. And that's exactly where I was going with it. That's what I thought, like just pick that out of there and put it on the website so that we can say to people, this is what happened at the council meeting and this is what the councilors were saying at that time. So if you could do that, that would be greatly appreciated. So, I've run out of questions for the moment, but I'm sure I'll come up with another one in a couple of minutes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I see someone in MCO. They have their hand up in the participant list. I'm not sure who MCO is. If you have a question or you we can come on video or, okay, yes. How will council be given this feedback, and will they be voting on the 4 options, or will they receive a recommendation? Excellent, thank you. Fantastic question. Council will be relayed this feedback via the final report. We will certainly be listing what we heard in the open houses, but also the data collected from the survey and other feedback avenues. We will be providing a recommendation to council. So it's not to say what their recommendation is. Maybe one of these options, maybe a hybrid of them, and maybe something entirely new based upon the feedback that we receive at this point. The options are very much for discussion to help generate discussion amongst the public. I appreciate that, Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, I can speak into, okay. Hi, my name is Connor Perotti. I'll be presenting more extensive questions tomorrow night, but for now, I just have a question of, will the recommendations, so off the feedback that's given in tonight through the survey and through the 3 public participation meetings, will there be adjustments made to the 4 proposals based on those comments, or will the plan be presented similar to what it is now? Like how, essentially, how extensive are your adjustments going to be presented before council?
Yeah, so certainly. So it would depend on what we hear from public. So I mean, as I mentioned previously, what gets recommended to council, it could be one of these options. It could be a hybrid of them. It could be something entirely new, drawing from elements from them. We'd like to gather the feedback from the public collectively, and then make a determination about how best to proceed. So all to say that there's nothing that's cast in die right now. We are sincerely looking for feedback from the public as we proceed.
A follow-up, would that possibly include outside map proposals from the public as well?
Are you saying that you have a map that you would like to provide us?
Yes, 2 kind of hybrid proposals using some of the options presented here.
Yeah, if you're attending the meeting tomorrow, you can certainly give that to one of the members of the team.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sorry, it's Sarah from City Clerks. If you have that type of feedback, I think the best way to get it to us would be email at elections@london.ca, or if you prefer in person, to the 3rd floor of City Hall, to the City Clerk's office.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. Yeah, so that as Sarah mentioned, would be the appropriate pathway. Thank you very much for correcting me, Sarah. I appreciate that. Are there any other questions in the room? Anyone eager to make any further comments about ward options or anything else that we discussed tonight? I don't see anyone in the Q&A.
Back again. Push the button. Okay. Hi, I'm back again. So just another comment about process here and the consultations. The time of tonight's consultation and tomorrow night's as well. I will be going to tomorrow night's one in Argyle at the Optimus Center. Anyway, the time of 5 to 7. Now, I know that that's a time that has been used in the past. But the problem with 5 to 7 is if someone works the day shift and they get done at 5, they have to get here, and the city has managed to close just about every road that we have with construction. And I think it would be better to have a meeting that starts at 7 so that people have a chance to go home and get some supper and deal with the traffic And that way, I think you might get greater participation. But you're doing a consultation, you say you want the public to participate, but you do it over the supper hour. And I know outside of London, another case where there was a public consultation, and again, it was at 5 to 7, and I know that public members out there complained about that. So anyway, or you could do both, maybe a 5 to 7 one and a 7 until 9 one. But just another comment there. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I'm just scanning to see if we have any other questions or comments from anyone. Happy to respond to any. If you have anyone with any questions, comments, concerns, anything about the process, anything at all, we are available to you.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can cycle through the slides and maybe we'll turn off the screens for right now. And if questions pop up, we'll turn on the camera again.
Sure.
If that works.
Sure, sir. Are you asking us to take the slides down? So,
No, keep the slides going so that
Okay.
everyone can take a look. Yeah, okay.
Perfect.
I'm just going to mute this room.
Okay. Thanks so much. Appreciate it, Sarah. A question here from Dan. Would councillors adjust to any new ward location? So it is up to a member of the public to decide which, if they would like to run in any of the wards. The current members of council could certainly choose to run for re-election in any of the wards that they would like to, whether it's a ward that is configured very similar to the ward that they have right now, or a different one based upon any potential changes to the map. So all to say, councillors are free to run in whichever ward they like, as long as they're on the electors list. Thank you very much for that, Dan. I appreciate it. Question here from Dan. What city are you and your company from? Watson's and Associates is headquartered in Mississauga. I'm from Hamilton. I live in Hamilton. I'm a sub-consultant on the project. I'm also a professor at York University in Toronto. Hope that helps clarify, Dan. No problem. Thanks, Dan. And if I don't know if it adds anything, Dan, I was a resident of London for many years when I was at Western, leaving the city around 2013. So I'll say I do have a bit of history here too. Thanks, Dan.